The day my father handed me a cardboard box and told me to get off the property, I was holding a wrench I had used to fix his equipment every single day for 11 years. I set the wrench down on the workbench. I did not throw it. I did not slam it. I set it down the way you set something down when you understand, finally and completely, that you are never picking it up again. My name is Daniel Mercer. I am 41 years old. I own a company that last year generated $9.2 million in revenue. And none of that matters as much as what happened on a Tuesday morning in March of 2013, when my father looked me in the eye in the parking lot of Mercer Fabrication and said, "We don't need you anymore, Danny. Your brother is taking over. This is his now." But if I start there, you won't understand what was actually taken from me. So let me go back 12 years further, to the morning I turned 18, and my father put his hand on my shoulder at the breakfast table and said, "Son, one day this is all going to be yours." I believed him for 23 years. That is the part of the story that never stops being expensive. Mercer Fabrication was a custom metal shop in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, started by my grandfather Raymond Mercer in 1971. He had built it from one lathe and a loading dock lease into a 40-employee operation that supplied custom structural components to builders across the mid-Atlantic. When I was 8 years old, my grandfather let me sit in the cab of the delivery truck on Saturday mornings while he did his rounds. He would point at buildings going up on the highway and say, "See that? We made the bones of that." I grew up thinking that was the most important thing a man could say about his work. My grandfather died in 2001 when I was 19. He left the shop to my father, Robert Mercer, with a single handwritten note attached to the will that the attorney read aloud. It said, "Robert, keep it honest and keep it in the family." That note would come back. Everything in this story comes back. I started working there full-time at 20, not because I had no other options. I had been accepted to Penn State for mechanical engineering. I turned it down the week my grandfather died because my father sat across the kitchen table from me with his eyes red and said he needed me. He said the shop was going to fall apart without someone he could trust running the floor. He said I was the only one in the family who understood how the machines worked. My brother Kevin was 16 at the time and had about as much interest in fabrication as he had in doing his own laundry. I said yes. I deferred my enrollment. I never went back to it. For 11 years, I ran the floor of Mercer Fabrication, not as a manager with a title, as the person the machinist called at 6 in the morning when a press broke, as the person who drove to Maryland on a Sunday in December to personally deliver a job we had nearly missed because a junior employee had misfiled the spec sheet. I negotiated 3 union contracts. I brought in our 2 biggest accounts, a construction firm in Baltimore and a government subcontract through a contact I had made at a trade show in Pittsburgh that I had attended on my own time. In 2010, I restructured our workflow and we turned our first genuinely profitable year in 7. My father shook my hand that December at the company Christmas party. He said, "Danny, I don't know what I'd do without you." His words. Christmas party, 2010. I have a photograph from that night, and my father is smiling in it with his arm around me. And I'm smiling too, and I look exactly like a man who believes the thing he is standing in. I never asked for equity. I never pushed for a formal ownership stake. I took a salary that was comfortably below what I could have earned doing the same job anywhere else because I believed, genuinely, that what I was building was mine in every way that mattered. My grandfather had said it would be. My father had said it would be. I was 20 years old when I first heard it, and 31 when I finally understood it wasn't true. Here is what I did not know until the year everything fell apart. My brother Kevin had come back from college in 2008 with a degree in business and a girlfriend named Melissa Crane, whose father, a man named Roy Crane, owned a commercial real estate development company in Philadelphia. Roy Crane had been looking for acquisition targets in the manufacturing sector. He had been specifically interested in small family operations with strong contract books and low overhead that could be folded into a larger supply chain portfolio without much friction. Kevin had introduced him to our father at Thanksgiving in 2009. I was at that Thanksgiving. I sat at the same table. Roy Crane shook my hand and asked me what I did, and I said I ran the floor. And he nodded and talked to my father for the rest of the evening about golf. For 3 years, my father and Kevin and Roy Crane had been meeting quarterly at a law office in Center City, Philadelphia. I know this because the attorney invoices eventually became discoverable. They were structuring a sale of Mercer Fabrication to a holding company Roy Crane controlled. The final sale price was $2.3 million, which was not a fair market valuation, and which every independent appraiser I have since spoken to has described in almost the exact same language. A sweetheart deal between parties with a pre-existing relationship. The deal closed on a Monday. I was told on a Tuesday. My father did not sit me down in his office. He did not call me the night before. He met me in the parking lot at 7:15 in the morning when I arrived for my shift, and he was standing next to Kevin, and Kevin was wearing a jacket I had never seen and holding a coffee I had not made. My father handed me the cardboard box. He said the words about my brother taking over. He said the new ownership had their own team coming in to transition the floor management. He said HR would send my final paperwork to the house. I said one thing. I said, "Did you use my contracts in the sale price?" He did not answer me. I put the box in my car. I drove to a diner on Route 322. I ordered coffee I did not drink. I sat in a window booth for 2 hours, and I did not cry because I was not sad. I was doing the kind of arithmetic that happens when a very clean, very cold part of your brain takes over and starts adding things up that you had previously refused to count. I had given that shop 11 years. I had built 2 of its 4 major accounts from scratch. I had restructured its operations. I had taken below market pay in exchange for a promise that had never been put in writing because I had trusted the people making it. And the 2 people who had made it to me, the man who was my father and the boy I had watched grow up, had sold the thing I had built without telling me it was for sale and had given me a cardboard box in a parking lot as a severance package. I drove home. I called an attorney. His name was Marcus Webb. He was not famous. He was 47 years old, worked out of a 2-room office in Camp Hill, and had a reputation in the mid-state manufacturing sector for being very slow and very thorough, and very rarely wrong. I had heard his name from a supplier once years earlier. I had written it on the back of a business card and kept it in my wallet for no reason I could have explained at the time. His name stayed in my wallet for 4 years. On the day I left my father's parking lot with a cardboard box, I drove directly to his office without an appointment and sat in his waiting room for 2 hours until he was free. I told him everything. I told him about the Sunday drives with my grandfather. I told him about deferring Penn State. I told him about the Christmas party and the handshake and the words my father had used. I told him about the Baltimore account and the government subcontract and the $2.3 million sale and the Tuesday morning parking lot. Marcus Webb listened with a yellow legal pad and did not write anything down for the first 20 minutes. Then he started writing and did not stop. When I finished, he looked at his notes for a long time. He said, "Did your grandfather's will say anything specific about succession?" I said I didn't know. I had been 19 when it was read and grieving, and I had not kept a copy. He said, "I'd like to find one." It took Marcus 4 weeks to locate the original will through the estate court records in Dauphin County. The will itself was straightforward. The shop to my father, the house to my grandmother, the personal effects divided among the family. But there was a codicil that had been filed separately 6 months before my grandfather died. A codicil that my father's attorney, at the time of the reading, had mentioned only briefly, and had characterised as a routine operating note with no legal force. It was not routine. And it had legal force. My grandfather had written it in consultation with his own attorney after a conversation with my father about the future of the business. The codicil stated, in plain language, that in the event Mercer Fabrication was ever sold to a non-family party, any employee who had worked at the company for more than 5 years in a substantial operational capacity was entitled to 15% of the net sale proceeds, to be held in trust by the estate executor and distributed within 90 days of closing. My grandfather had written that codicil because he did not fully trust my father's judgment in a crisis. He had told his attorney that. The attorney's notes from the drafting session were still in the file. My father had known about the codicil. His attorney had known. The attorney who handled the sale to Roy Crane's holding company had reviewed the estate documents as part of due diligence. All of them had known. Nobody had told me. Marcus Webb filed suit in June of 2013. I want you to understand what those next 18 months felt like, because this is where most people would have made the mistake I was specifically trying not to make. Most people, when they are angry and hurt and burning with the specific grief of being betrayed by someone they loved, make the mistake of moving fast. They make noise. They confront. They post things online. They let the other side see what they're carrying. I did not do any of that. I moved home to a small apartment in Mechanicsburg. I took a job as a floor supervisor at a competing fabrication shop in York. I went to work at 6 in the morning. I came home at 6 at night. I did not call my father. I did not call Kevin. I did not respond to the 2 text messages my mother sent me in August that said things like, "Your father misses you, and I wish you would just talk to him." I did not respond because I did not trust myself to respond in a way that would help my case, and because I had learned, in the parking lot that Tuesday morning, that the people who say they miss you are not always the people who mean it. I also did not stop working. By 2015, I had raised enough capital from 2 former colleagues and a small business loan to start a company. I called it Meridian Structural. We were small, 4 employees, and a leased floor space in Carlisle, and our first year revenue was $400,000, which sounds reasonable until you understand that I had spent the previous 11 years building a company that generated 4 times that. I had started over. I had started over by choice, in the same industry, in the same region, because I knew exactly what I was doing and exactly how to do it. What I also did, quietly, was begin calling the people I had known, the contacts I had built, the Baltimore firm, the government subcontract program manager. Not to poach, not immediately. I called them to maintain relationships. I called them to say hello. I'm still around. I'm building something new. I asked about their current suppliers. I asked if they were satisfied with their current arrangements. I listened more than I talked. I sent handwritten notes after those calls, which nobody does anymore and which people remember specifically because nobody does it anymore. In 2016, the Baltimore firm ended their contract with Mercer Fabrication and signed a new one with Meridian Structural. The project manager told me later that he had not felt the same level of attention from the new management and that when he had raised a delivery concern, he had been routed to 3 different people before anyone called him back. In 2017, the government subcontract renewed under Meridian. We were the better bid by 11%, and our certification record was cleaner. Marcus Webb's lawsuit settled in December of 2017. The settlement was confidential, but the number was not small. My father's attorney had tried twice to have the codicil declared unenforceable. Both attempts failed. The judge in the second attempt wrote an opinion that was 2 sentences longer than necessary, which is a judge's way of saying he found the defendant's position unpersuasive and wanted the record to reflect it. I used the settlement as working capital. I did not celebrate. I reinvested every dollar. By 2019, Meridian Structural had 14 employees and a second floor space. By 2021, we were at 22 employees, and I had turned away 2 acquisition inquiries, one from a regional conglomerate and one from a holding company in New Jersey that I recognized when I ran the principals as a subsidiary of Roy Crane's portfolio. That one I found particularly interesting. I did not respond to it. In 2022, my mother called me for the first time in 4 years. Not a text, a phone call. She called me from her cell phone on a Wednesday afternoon in November, and when I answered, she did not say anything for a full 3 seconds. Then she said, "Danny, it's your mother." As though I would not have recognized her voice, as though the only explanation for the silence was that I had forgotten her. I had not forgotten her. I had simply been waiting. She told me that Mercer Fabrication had been struggling since 2019. Kevin had lost 2 accounts due to delivery failures and a quality dispute on a commercial contract. The workforce had been cut from 40 employees to 23. Roy Crane's holding company had restructured the deal in 2020, and my father had ended up with significantly less than the original sale price after penalties and renegotiation fees. The shop was still running, but it was not what it had been. My father was 68 and tired and had not been well. She said, "Your father wants to talk to you." I said, "Okay." She said, "He wants to know if there's any way to make things right." I said, "Tell him I'm listening." What happened next is the part of this story that I want you to understand very carefully, because it is the part where most people would have made the second mistake. The first mistake would have been moving fast when I was angry. The second mistake would have been forgiving quickly when I was finally being asked. My father called me on a Saturday morning in January of 2023. I was in my office reviewing Q4 numbers. I answered. He sounded older than I expected. He asked how I was. I said fine. He asked about the business. I said it was going well. He did not ask how well because I think he already knew. I had not hidden what Meridian was doing. I was not hiding from anyone. I had just been building. He said, "Danny, I think I made a mistake." I said, "I know." He said, "Kevin didn't tell me how bad it had gotten until it was too late to change things." I said nothing. He said, "I should have protected you. Your grandfather would have wanted me to protect you. I know that now." I let him finish. Then I said, "Dad, I need you to hear something. I don't need your apology to be okay. I built something without you. It works. I'm fine. But you asked if there was a way to make things right, and I want to answer that honestly." He said, "Okay." I said, "There is one thing I want. It has nothing to do with money." 3 weeks later, my father arranged a meeting at the old shop. He sent the invitation to me, to Kevin, to my mother, to the 3 senior employees who had been with the company since my grandfather's time, and who were still there, and to 6 of the current clients. He told each of them it was a company anniversary meeting. He did not tell them what it was actually for. I arrived last. I walked in through the same door I'd walked through for 11 years. The machines were the same. The smell of metal and coolant was the same. The workbench where I had set down the wrench on that Tuesday morning in March of 2013 was still there, and the wrench I had set down was still on it, which I do not think was intentional, but which felt like something anyway. Kevin was standing near the back wall with his arms crossed. He had not spoken to me in 10 years. He looked like a man who had been told something was going to happen and had not been told what. My mother was seated in a folding chair near the front, and her hands were in her lap, the same way they always had been when she was waiting for something to either go well or go badly. My father stood in the middle of the floor. He was thinner than I remembered. He had a paper in his hand. He looked at me when I walked in, and he nodded in a way that was not casual. It was the nod of a man who had rehearsed something and was confirming that the other person whose presence he needed had arrived. He spoke for 7 minutes. He told everyone in that room what had happened in 2013. Not a general version, the full version. The codicil, the sale, the parking lot, the cardboard box. He said that he had sold the company his father had built using accounts that his son had built, without telling his son, and that his son had been owed 15% of the proceeds under his grandfather's own instructions, and that he had known that and had allowed his attorneys to attempt to argue against it anyway. He said, "I put my brother's kids ahead of my own kid, and I have spent 10 years trying to find a way to make that untrue. I can't, so I'm saying it out loud instead." Kevin in the back of the room said his name once, "Dad," in a voice that was not a question. My father did not look at him. One of the senior employees, a machinist named Gerald, who had been with the shop since 1988 and who had shaken my hand on my first day and told me my grandfather would have been proud, started to say something and couldn't finish it. He pressed his lips together and looked at the floor. My father reached into his pocket and took out an envelope. He walked across the floor to me. He held it out. I looked at it for a moment, then I took it. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper. It was a letter, handwritten, addressed to me. At the top it said, "Danny, your grandfather asked me to give you this if I ever thought you needed it." The letter was from my grandfather. He had written it in 2001, 3 months before he died, and given it to my father sealed, with instructions to pass it to me if I ever seemed to lose confidence in what I was building. My father had never given it to me. He had kept it for 22 years. In the letter, my grandfather said he had watched me sit in that delivery truck on Saturday mornings and understood something about me that he wanted me to know he had seen. He said I had the kind of patience that was rare in a young person, and that patience, in a craftsman and in a man, was the thing that turned raw material into something worth keeping. He said, "Whatever they tell you about what you deserve, remember that a man who knows how to make something of value is never actually starting from nothing." I read it standing on that shop floor, with the machines around me, and Gerald still not looking up from the floor, and Kevin against the back wall, and my mother with her hands in her lap, and my father standing in front of me waiting to hear what I was going to do with 22 years of a letter he had not delivered. I folded it. I put it in my jacket pocket. I looked at my father. I said, "Thank you for saying it out loud." He nodded again. The same nod. This time it meant something different. I looked at Kevin. Kevin looked back at me. He did not apologise. I did not ask him to. We are not close, and I do not expect we will be. but he looked at me directly, which was more than he had managed in 10 years, and I understood that the rest of it was between him and whatever he decides to do with what he heard that day. I left the shop, I walked to my car, I sat in it for exactly as long as I needed to, which was about 4 minutes. Then I drove back to my office in Carlisle, and I finished reviewing the Q4 numbers, which were the best we had ever had. There is a building going up on Interstate 283 south of Harrisburg, a commercial distribution centre, 4 stories, pre-engineered steel frame. The bones of that building are ours. I know because I reviewed the spec sheets myself. My grandfather would have liked that. My grandfather told me once that the thing about a wrench is that it belongs to whoever picks it up and knows what to do with it. I thought about that for a long time before I understood he was not talking about tools. The people who force you out with nothing are always counting on you to believe them about the nothing.